Good day, everyone. Thanks for joining me. My name is Marilee Bostic, and today we're going to dig a little bit into the region of Bolgheri. The learning objectives for today are pretty straightforward. Number one is we want to locate Bolgheri on the map. Where is it? Number two, we'll describe the terroir of Bolgheri. And if you don't fret, if you forgot what terroir means, I will recap that when we get there. And number three, I'd like you to be able to tell the story of Bulgarian Super Tuscan wines. It's a really cool story, as you'll see in a bit. And then last but not least, after the presentation, we'll taste a wine from Bolgheri together, and we'll take our time and compare our tasting notes. After all, that's why you came today. Just as a side note, all of the pictures in this presentation come from our trip to Bolgheri and the region of Tuscany in 2016. And the crest that you see here on this slide is the crest of Bolgheri as you enter the village. All right, so where is Bolgheri? In case you didn't get the 411, we're in Italy today. And here's a simple map of Italy showing all of the regions. Think of a region as an estate like Oregon or New Jersey. And you can see that most of Italy is surrounded by the Mediterranean Sea. And today we're in Tuscany or Toscana. And that's this region right here. And one thing I'd like to point out, which is very important, is that Tuscany has a long coastline, and a subsea of the Mediterranean here is the Tyrrhenian Sea. And it has a long coastline, which is very important when it comes to Bolgheri, as you'll see in a bit. So drilling down further, don't get too, concerned with this map, but these are all the major wine regions of Tuscany. And yes, most of them are in my head, but let's break this down so it's not so scary. So you probably know something about Tuscany more than you think. So first up, what are the major cities that you might recognize? So first up is Florence, major art capital of the world. This is the home to Michelangelo's statue of David. You probably have heard of Siena, and you likely also have heard of Pisa because of the Leaning Tower of Pisa. So not so bad after all. And in terms of the wines, I bet you've had a couple of the wines from Tuscany. Chianti or Chianti Classico are probably ones that you have tried and enjoy. And those are made mostly or entirely of Sangiovese. After all, Tuscany is all about Sangiovese. It's the heart and king of this grape. There's no other region in the world that produces more Sangiovese than Tuscany. You probably have also tried a Brunello di Montalcino, and these are special wines as well, and they're made of entirely 100% Sangiovese. So now where's Bolgheri? Here is where Bolgheri is located, right here. And we'll get to Bolgheri Sassicaia in just a bit, but not to let it out of the bag too much, but instead of Sangiovese, Bolgheri is known for its Bordeaux varietals. So Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Petit Verdot, Cabernet Franc. So instead of Sangiovese, different styles of wines are produced in Bolgheri, and that's what makes Bolgheri so special. And what I want to recap here is this, here is the coastline again. So the Tyrrhenian Sea is all along here. And so Bolgheri is also special because of its proximity to the Tyrrhenian Sea, much different than Chianti, right? That's more inland, and even Brunello di Montalcino, which is inland. So Bolgheri is special due to its proximity to the Tyrrhenian Sea. All right, we now know where Bolgheri is on the map. So what is its terroir? Now, as a quick recap, terroir is all about the growing environment of the vineyard. It could be of a single row within a vineyard, it could be a single vine, but it's the growing environment overall and how that affects the wine in your glass and the quality of wine in your glass. So here's a picture of Bolgheri, and a picture is worth 1,000 words. You can see that it's really sunny. So here are the vineyards, and then out here is the island of Elba. And then also you have France's Corsica way off here in the distance. And then again, the Tyrrhenian Sea, beautiful picture. It's exactly the way you would picture it. You know, you put your feet up with a glass of wine and you take in the sun rays and the cool breezes. That's exactly how it is here in this region. So to recap, climate and weather, that's a big factor in terms of terroir. So we have a Mediterranean climate here, which means the summers are warm, low humidity, and not too much rain, which is really great. Rain predominantly falls in the winter, so not during the growing season of the vine. As you can see, lots and lots of sun with warm to hot temperatures. And the key thing again is this proximity to the sea, because it doesn't get too hot. Because if you think about, you know, sea waters, the sea itself cools the land, as well as the breezes roll off, you know, from offshore onshore, and keeps everything just a tad cooler than further inland. What else do we see? We see rolling hills. This is not a flat region at all. You can see one vineyard planted here, another one's planted here. And that's a good thing, because if you think about how the sun comes up in the east and sets in the west, these vines are planted in such a way that they get the most sunlight throughout the day. And that's very important, because we want to make sure all those grapes fully ripen and are ready for winemaking. And last but not least are the soil types. And there are many soils identified in this region that are primarily marine and alluvial. But what I want to focus on today is the stoniness here. You can kind of see it here. It's gravelly. And one of the interesting correlations is that the major soil type in the region of Bordeaux, France, where all the Bordeaux varietals are planted, so again, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, etc., the famous soil there is also gravel. I mean, you probably have heard of the region of Graves. Well, that means gravel. And even north in the Homedoc, the famous soils are gravelly and stony, of all of those high-priced, expensive, and sought-after wines. All right, so that is the terroir of Bolgheri. Key takeaways: super sunny, really nice, warm, but moderated by that Tyrrhenian Sea that's right there, rolling hills with plenty of sunlight, and then again, that stony and gravelly soil that's so important. All right, just a quick note on the side, here's the village of Bolgheri. It does sit up on a hill. It is fortified, which means it's surrounded by walls. This is a little wine store in Bolgheri. And we traveled with Master of Wine, Philip Goodbrand, and this is Filippo Mignani, who is our fearless tour group leader. We had a great time. All right, so a little bit about appellation rules. I'm not going to go into that because that would be, you know, an hour and a half to even dig a little bit deep into that topic. But let's drill it down for this presentation today. Let's say you lived in Ridgewood, New Jersey. And let's say you had a winery and you had some vines and you finally made your first wine. You'd be so excited about it. You would want to put Ridgewood, New Jersey on your wine label, because after all, that's where the wine is. That's where you are. And maybe in America, you might be able to do that. But in the European Union and also in Italy, not so fast. There are lots of rules that go into the wine labels. So for Bolgheri, if you see Bolgheri DOC, and that's just an acronym for some long Italian language, but basically what it means is it's a protected designation of origin. And what that means is when you see that on the label and on the label of the wine that you're tasting today, that means that there are rules that must apply. Meaning if you're making a wine in Bolgheri and you want to put that on your label, you have to comply by the rules. So interestingly, even though this, Tuscany is known for its Sangiovese, the initial rules of Bolgheri were only implemented in 1983, and they were for white and rosé wines only. Really weird, right? So the white wines were for Vermentino, and the rosé wines were pink wines made of Sangiovese. And this is kind of late in the game if you think about it, because in France, they started putting in their appellation system in the 1930s. Italy predominantly started implementing their system in the 1960s. The Bulgaris kind of late in the game, again, with their first set of rules in 1983. Thankfully, the appellation rules were updated in 1994, and this is the first time that red wines could be made, but then of Sangiovese. No Bordeaux varietals were allowed at the time. So with that in mind, of course, there were a few rule breakers, folks who did not want to follow the rules. They just really had a sneaky feeling that different varieties, namely Bordeaux varieties, would do well in the region of Bolgheri. Remember that stony soil and that correlation between, Bolgheri and Bordeaux? So sure enough, there are two rule breakers I want to review with you today. And the first is Brochetta, and he is of the Tenuta Sangito estate in Bolgheri. And after World War II, he started experimenting with planting Bordeaux varietals. And maybe it wasn't so good in the beginning, but then it started getting good. So good that he officially released what's called the Sassicaia. And here's the label. It's still, still produced today. And Sassicaia means stony field. First introduced in 1972 with the 1968 vintage, and it was made with 85% Cabernet Sauvignon and 15% Cabernet Franc. And our next rule breaker is Antinori. You probably have heard of Antinori. He still has a big presence throughout Tuscany. And his wine was released in 1985, and it was called Ornellaia. And it was made with 80% Cabernet Sauvignon, 15% Merlot, and 5% Cabernet Franc. The cool thing is that they didn't just start producing this wine, but people started to recognize these wines and seek them and want to try them because they were that good. So thankfully, they really rose and gained critical acclaim. Decanter held a blind wine tasting event in 1978, and you betcha, the Sassicaia with the 1972 vintage beat out a number of top Bordeaux wines. And you betcha the French were not happy about this for sure. And love him or hate him, Robert Parker awarded the first Italian wine in all of history with 100 points. And this went to the 1985 vintage of Sassicaia. So thankfully, yes, they were rule breakers. Yes, they couldn't put Bolgheri on their label. I'm kind of giving it away, but these wines really gained worldwide attention, which really is an awesome story that continues. All right, let's keep going. So as I kind of mentioned already, they couldn't put Bolgheri DOC, that protected designation of origin, on their wine label because they weren't following the rules. Red wines at that time had to be made with Sangiovese. And the only term that they could put on the wine label at that time was vino da tavola, which means table wine. And just think of that connotation, right? It's not very positive at all. I think of like a grandfather who's a farmer and he happens to have a couple of rows of vines on the side, and he makes the wine in his basement and he serves it, to his family in a carafe over dinner. That's the connotation I get. So nevertheless, it certainly didn't match the quality and how great these wines were by putting this on the label. Not the best thing. And so this is really the story of Super Tuscan wines. So think about, how do you market these wines if you have to put Vino da Tavola on the label? And so it was a brilliant little workaround. Well, not so little, it became a worldwide phenomenon, but Super Tuscan, the term, was coined to identify and to send a message to the consumer that this wine was not Sangiovese, it was a rule breaker, and it was made with Bordeaux varieties. And so now you know the story of how the term Super Tuscan came about. So the nice thing about Bolgheri is it ends well, I promise. So the nice thing is that the appellation rules were changed again in 1994, 2011, and again in 2013. And the main thing is that the government and everyone involved in terms of the wines of Bolgheri really wanted to protect these superior quality wines because they are something special. If you haven't had one, you must try them because they definitely set themselves apart from other wines of the world. So today, if you were to pick up a Bolgheri DOC wine, it has to follow the rules again. And so it will have 0 to 100% Cabernet Sauvignon, 0 to 100% Merlot, 0 to 100% Cabernet Franc, either all three, one or two, doesn't matter. And if you're going to use Syrah or Sangiovese, it must be a maximum of 50%. So again, Sangiovese is not the focus here of this region whatsoever. And in fact, it's not planted a whole lot. And then of course, if you want to use other suitable varieties for production in Tuscany, you can. Interestingly, too, Bolgheri allows white wine. We're talking about red wines today, I know, but if white wine is produced, it must be made of Vermentino, Trebbiano Toscana, or Sauvignon, and there are a couple other complementary varieties in there. So interesting factoid about Bolgheri. And then Bolgheri Sassicaia, now that you know all about Sassicaia and how famous it became and how famous it still is, in 2013, it petitioned and said, hey, I want to be my own appellation. I don't want to fall under the Bolgheri appellation. I want to stand all by, on its own. And so today it's only approved for red wines, no whites allowed. And so if you see Bolgheri Sassicaia on the label, which would be a Sassicaia wine, is a minimum of 80% Cabernet Sauvignon, and then 20% of other suitable varieties for cultivation in Tuscany. So thankfully, it all ends well. Bolgheri decided to change their laws to really protect its superior quality wines that certainly are still sought after today. So that is a wrap. I'm just going to do a quick recap. So now you know, through our little presentation and time together, you know exactly where Bolgheri is on the map in Tuscany. And you know that it's important because of its proximity to the Tyrrhenian Sea. You know, it's super sunny. That picture is worth 1,000 words. And you also know that the soils are stony, just like Bordeaux, are very similar. And last but not least, I believe you could tell the story of Bolgheri, the early appellation rules, the renegade producers, and how they just said, you know what, we're going to do something else and different. The birth of super Tuscan wines and how that term was coined and why. And then last but not least, the appellation rules in place today. Okay, thank you for your time today. I'm so glad you joined me and that you learned a thing or two about Bolgheri. Have a great night.